Hello, everyone. My name is Corbin, and I'm from CoderPad. We're going to be chatting today with Salma Alam-Naylor. I think I said that wrong again. Um, I apologize. I have the memory of a goldfish. But we're going to be talking about how Jamstack enables beginners to do all sorts of super awesome things. We're going to be chatting about like what the Jamstack is. We're going to be chatting about um, like what Edge is, which is something that's new that's been announced with Netlify recently. All in all, it's going to be a great conversation. I can't wait to chat with her more. Selma, how are you doing?
Hi, Corbin. I'm good, thanks. How are
I'm
you?
sorry about your name. You had just told me about it, and I was like, oh, I'm gonna remember. I was like repeating it in my head, and then as soon as the camera turned on, I was like,
And you did it so well in practice as
I
well.
know. I'm so sorry. I'm so
Hi, everyone. I'm Salma Alam-Naylor.
thank you.
Nice to
Thank you.
meet you.
So yes, do you want to give an intro on yourself? Because I think I skipped some of the pertinent details because you've got all
Mm.
sorts of impressive credentials and you're a generally awesome engineer all around.
Oh, thank you. It's funny. I never really know how to introduce myself because I come in many forms, but my professionally, I am a staff developer experience engineer at Netlify, which is a cloud hosting platform. I stream on Twitch regularly, and in the past, I come from an engineering background. So before I got into developer experience, developer relations, I was a tech lead for quite a few years in the Manchester area in the UK where I live, specializing in front end development. I got into that from front end development. And before that, I was a music teacher teaching 11 to 18-year olds. I was also a musical comedian. And before that, I used to teach kids how to play in rock bands.
That's pretty cool. And I'm
So,
assuming not the Rock Band game that I've that's the only Rock Band I've
no,
interacted with.
no, it's real rock bands with real guitars and real drums and real gigs and real stuff. And that's how I got into teaching. And then I qualified as a teacher and then worked in schools. So I did a music degree because, and when you do a music degree, there's only so much you can do when you leave that. And it's normally teaching. But I always wanted to work in tech. I always wanted to work in tech, but I never had the opportunity when I was a teenager and when I graduated. And, back in the 90s, early 2000s, people from small little places didn't really get to do tech and go on to do tech at university. So I'm a late tech entrant into the industry. And so I really like helping other people get into tech as well, especially if they are coming from something else and showing my experience and helping them through that. And TD is asking, what's a musical comedian? You know, Bill Bailey, TD, you tell jokes in the form of song. And I did it with my best friend. And that was really fun. We did a lot of gigs around the Northwest and London and blah blah blah. But being a comedian is is a tough gig, and you end up spending most of your time quite upset when no one's laughing at you. The come down from the gigs is real. So yeah, TD's probably too young to know who Bill Bailey is. Google him.
Truth be told, I think I'm gonna have to Google him later as well. There is a music comedian that I know of. Oh man, I'm spacing on his name, but he does a YouTube series called Unfinished London. But
Oh, I don't
he
know that
does.
one.
Oh, it's a great series if you're interested in like city planning or any of those things. But yeah, he does
So
really
niche.
small. Yeah, it's such a weird small niche, but like he does like hundreds of videos on them, and it's just fascinating every time. It's like, oh, tell me about what the London Bridge is and how it actually is this other bridge. Anyways. I'm nothing if not a connoisseur of niche, weird YouTube videos.
Brilliant.
But yeah, that's super cool. I never knew that background about your music history, so that's super fascinating.
Yeah, I am actually almost a year ago on my 10th wedding anniversary, did a music stream on Twitch with Mystery Husband, who is in the chat. We won't be repeating it this year, but that was fun. We did a live improvisation kind of thing. It was a lot of fun. Maybe we'll do it again one day. But I do want to get back into some music stuff. I've actually, if I'm going to get a little bit musical nerdy now.
Yeah.
If you haven't heard of it, Google a Rolly seaboard. I have pre-ordered a Rolly Seaboard that is going to be delivered in December, and it is like a 5-dimensional keyboard where you can do all sorts of funky stuff, and I'm really excited to get it to get back into creating music again.
Are those the ones that have like the like almost flat, like weird keyboard that you can then move up and
Yes,
down to like
yes.
those are wild. I saw
I
a demo for
know.
that recently and I was like, oh, that's cool. Oh, that's very cool.
Mystery Husband just saying he'd be up for another musical jam stream. Let's go soon, one day.
Yeah.
It's just such a nightmare to set up this room, to put all the stuff and to move it all around. So it takes a day.
Right, right. I remember one time I was like, all right, I'm gonna have like a small LAN party. Like we're gonna get everyone together on a stream and like I bought like 50-foot LAN cable and everything. And then I was like, all right, let's go. And then everyone canceled. And I was like, probably
Oh,
for the best if I'm being honest. Like, we can pretend that I would have done well, but in reality, we would have had crashes every 5 minutes.
fun and games, literal
Right.
games.
Yeah, exactly. So um but yeah, so I know that the work that I know you best from is either your Twitch stream or your Netlify work. And every single time I take a look at your blog post, I'm always amazed by how like fancy and beautiful your website looks.
Oh,
Like
thank you.
I swear each update looks cooler and cooler and more like stylized and stuff, which is really neat.
Brand is important, and UI and
I know.
accessibility and readability is important. I talk a lot about those things on my Twitch streams,
Yes.
because what good is the content if you can't read it?
Yes, we just had Ben Myers on to talk about accessibility
Oh,
not that long
yeah.
ago.
Love
That was a
Ben.
great conversation. Oh yeah, Ben's awesome. But yeah, so one of the things that I know that you talk a lot about is the Jamstack, right? Can you
Hmm.
shed a little bit of light on like what that term is? Because I've heard the word Jamstack a lot, and I think I've heard it defined in a few different ways. James Quick gave us a little bit of an intro, but I'm still a little hazy on it, truth be told. Could you like provide some details for us?
So I think the first misunderstanding of Jamstack is that Jamstack is defined by the tools you use.
Mhm.
But I want to bring it back to actually its roots. So Jamstack is an architecture decision. It's a way of working, and it's about prioritizing a specific architecture. So I'll tell you a bit of history before I tell you what it really is. So back in the day, when the internet was a new thing, and people were starting to browse websites in the internet. Every time somebody made a request on a URL to a website, the request would go all the way to a server, and that server would do some code, run some code to build the HTML document to send back to the user that requested it and their browser every single time. So that was server-side rendering as we know it today.
Mhm.
And coupled with that was the reliance in kind of early 2000s of these huge monolithic tech stacks. So every time you need to build a website or something, you would have to use a whole bundle of software that dictated your database, your backend, your front end, your CMS, everything. And so there were a lot of overheads in managing that huge monolithic software package. Every time you needed to upgrade a part of your website, you had to upgrade the whole thing. Back end and front end developers couldn't work very well together because everything was so tightly coupled.
Mhm.
And web development was hard, and front end developers were always kind of an afterthought because they had
Yeah.
to work on the front end templating system that big monolithic solution forced them to.
Mhm.
So in the early 2010s, people started to kind of try to solve this problem and start to decouple the front end from the back end. And this came about with the development of the first kind of front end frameworks such as AngularJS and Backbone.js, and they were both released version ones in 2010 and not very far apart from each other in October 2010.
Yeah.
And that approach actually paved the way for something like React that came out in 2013, that was made public in 2013. And front ends became their own ecosystem and their own kind of way of life that were decoupled from the back end, and you could build standalone front end applications without having to be so coupled to all those old monolithic tech stacks. Around that same time, static site generators were also being developed. So as we know, React is not a static site generator as such, because every time you load up a React app page, it gets hydrated and built on the client. But alongside that, static site generators were starting to be developed. And the first kind of OG static site generator, one of the first, was Jekyll, which is built on Ruby. It came out around 2013 to 2015. And what that did was, rather than like React, where it makes a kind of build request on the client to build the page with all the logic inside the code, what things like Jekyll and coupled with GitHub Pages, which is one of the first kind of static file hosting systems, what that meant was that something like Jekyll, you pushed your changes to a Jekyll project using Git or something like that. And there will be a build process then that would look through all of your files, and it would build all of the code that you wrote into static assets, static HTML documents that then would be cached on a CDN, which is a content delivery network. So rather than back in the day when you had everything, every request, server-side rendered, built on the server every single time, takes a few seconds, you then had, in contrast with Jekyll and static hosting services, every time you made a request, you just made a request for a static file that already existed and was already cached. And we'll get to this a little bit later when we talk about the edge, but on the CDNs are built on this edge network, right? So there's a network of nodes all around the world, and you make a request to like the server, the middle origin server, and that kind of gets like routed to the closest location to where you are. And that means you get a static asset served to your browser quickly because it's really close to you, and there's no need to build anything on the server. So essentially, Jamstack is that concept of serving those pre-generated assets that are bundled up at build time and just put somewhere on a CDN, serving them from a wide variety of hosting platforms. And that's the core thing: static first, build first. Jamstack has kind of moved on a little bit from that core principle, but is now kind of elevated and enriched and enhanced by what I like to call adjacent tooling, where we talk about serverless functions and software as a service and authentication as a service and all these different pieces of technology that you can leverage to either fetch data and put data into your static assets at build time, or you can, progressively enhance your static sites with server-side or client-side requests and other things to improve the experience. So Jamstack is basically, at its core, is serving static pre-generated assets from a CDN to avoid all of the back and forth from a server. It makes things fast, it makes things quick. It means you can move backwards and forwards between immutable deploys, we call them. So everything is like bundled up, every single deploy, every change you make, your CDN has version control, your hosting has version control, if you see what I mean. And that's really it. And another key part of that is that back in the day as well, you had to manage your own servers, physical or virtual servers. You had to manage them yourself. You had to pay for them. You had to maintain them. You had to scale them. You had to secure them. When you move to a more Jamstacky model, where you are hosting on a cloud hosting provider and a CDN, those companies, those tools and services take care of your scaling, your maintenance, your security, and all of that for you. And so all you need to do to work on the Jamstack is write some code, push it up, it builds your assets for you, and they get served from a CDN, and everyone's really happy.
Right. Man, that is I
Sorry, that was a very long description of
no,
the
no, no.
chat.
If I was looking off screen, it's because I'm actually pushing like the button to mark this section like repeatedly because this is such a great intro that I want to like put it at the very start of the video when we edit this for YouTube because I'm like, this is great, this is awesome. Like this is a really wonderfully cohesive story of the Jamstack, how it's come to be and what it means today. And kind of touching on some of like what is what are the benefits, especially for beginners, right? Like that idea of how do you scale is such like I remember when I started my career, I was like, okay, so like you have these load balancers and then you like shard your day, like what is
I have no
happening?
idea about all that stuff, and I don't need to care or worry, so it's
Right,
fine.
right. And a lot of that is like that's because of the shift in mentality of like DevOps being this idea of like being responsible for DevOps versus allowing a platform to handle DevOps for you, right? And I realized I just brought up a term that like we haven't defined yet, right? Like what is DevOps? And then like with that understanding, how do platforms help shift that? And what are some examples of platforms that help shift that?
So DevOps is short for developer operations, and it combines the development of software, dev, with IT operations, ops. And so DevOps is really everything regarding building, releasing, scaling, and securing your website or your app or your product or anything. The thing with DevOps is, like anything, it's very broad. And it could include making your site fast and reliable and available to more users at any one time, and that's what we call scaling. For example, if you are running an e-commerce store and you sell a very specialized Christmas product, for example, you know you're going to get a lot more traffic around the Christmas period. You need to make sure that you have availability on your servers to accommodate millions, potentially more requests, because I was talking about this in a latest blog post. Back in the day, for small projects, when you are managing and hosting your own servers, you could do that on a PC in your bedroom, but that could only take so much load. This is why you were talking about load balancers earlier. The job of a load balancer is to balance the load. And, that's what DevOps is as well. And DevOps is looking at security and HTTPS, and also CI and CD processes, continuous integration and continuous deployment, and how you build and release your apps, and infrastructure as code, and those kind of things. The thing with Jamstack and using a cloud hosting provider that provides a CDN is that you don't need to worry about any of that whatsoever. And platforms like Netlify, they give you HTTPS for free. And I remember back in the day, I had to implement my own HTTPS certificates on servers in the past, and no one wants to do that. No one, especially when you're a front-end developer like me. I can do it, but I don't care about it. I'd rather somebody else did it for me, and take away that pain so I can actually focus on doing what I'm good at and building websites, rather than server stuff. And hey, Jay Langsdorff is here. Welcome in. And so the responsibility of DevOps shifts completely away when you're working on the Jamstack, and it gives you more time as a developer, more headspace to innovate and create, right? And think about the things that really matter for your product. And you don't need to worry about anything. And you were talking about how is Jamstack good for beginners? I mean, that is absolutely key. Beginners don't need to learn necessarily straight away about all of those processes and security and reliability and scaling when they're just starting out, because it's going to overwhelm you, right? And the great thing about Jamstack is actually you can just host a website that's a plain HTML file. If you're just starting out on Free Code Camp, for example, and doing the responsive HTML course, you can create your HTML file. You can upload it to a CDN, to Netlify, or wherever. And there it is. It's done. It's a static HTML file. It's a static asset served on the Jamstack, basically. You don't even need to worry about build processes or any JavaScript or any CSS. You can start and host a plain single page HTML file on the Jamstack without setting up your own server. Do you remember, were you around with in the time when we had to manage http.conf files?
Oh, I don't know about those. What are the oh.
So that's when you're dealing with Nginx and all that stuff. You don't even need to worry about that. So when you're a developer, on the Jamstack, like Jay Langstoff says, lower barrier to entry to build something meaningful. And that is absolutely like key for beginners. You know, when you're just starting out with something and you can't understand the docs, you're getting things wrong, you don't know where to look. And so you need to try and remove as much of that friction to get something live as possible. And Jamstack removes so much friction to just get something live. To one of my key philosophies in web development is to YOLO deploy anything. You know, don't worry about if it's perfect or if it works or if it looks nice or if it even means anything. Just get everything out there that you can, and that's what's going to give you the confidence to keep going, to learn, and the adrenaline you get, especially when you're just starting out, the adrenaline that you get when you push something up and you can see it on a live URL. And that is what like the Jamstack opens up for you. It lets you do that in literally minutes. HTML file, my website, push
Right.
to Git, connect to Netlify, done. And there it is. And you can send it to your friends and you can say, hey, mom, look what I built. And that's where the joy comes on removing all of those barriers, removing those pain points. You know, I find a lot of people like to worship the complexity that tech can possess. But I like to do completely the opposite and
Yeah.
actually elevate the simplicity that tech can have to
Mm,
enable you to do more things and to empower you to do more things. Jamstack has made web development more accessible, easier to get started, and just fly and iterate and enjoy yourself.
for sure. I love all the excitement in chat, by the way. We've got all sorts of like emotes going on and do less but better
Hi,
and flattening the
everyone.
learning curve. Yes, it's great. Um, to your point, I think one of the other things that having others like platforms like Netlify be able to do hosting for you is it, my goodness, the anxiety. Like it helps mitigate the anxiety so much. I can't tell you how many times it's like, oh man, my SSL cert broke. 1,000 people are visiting the website this week. Oh no. Like
Yeah.
now you're staying up until 3 a.m. desperately trying to figure out what's going on with Let's Encrypt and like
See, my
uh
husband, who's in the chat, is an
mhm,
infrastructure engineer, right? And
mhm.
the stories I hear from him about SSL certificates and server scaling and different environments and blah, 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 it's like, just move to the Jamstack, yo. I mean, he can't.
Yeah.
But, it's like I see the pain in my household every day, and then it makes me feel even more joyful that I work on the Jamstack.
Heck yeah. And I think like one of the exciting parts about stuff like Netlify is like, so I don't know if anyone here has tried to roll their own, and I truly do mean roll your own CI/CD, right? Like not using like GitHub Actions, not using like literally just trying to use your own like Node webhook listener and then manually syncing files to like an S3 and like whatever, right? It's painful. It's so painful. I've tried to do it before, and eventually we're like, but what about this Jamstack thing though, right? Like
Let me
it's kind
say
of
though,
interesting.
obviously there are people who have had to build this
Mhm.
infrastructure, right? And I thank these developers every single
Oh
day
yeah.
from the bottom of my heart that this problem was solved, it was iterated on, it was innovated on, and there are some geniuses allowing me to just YOLO deploy nonsense websites every week, and
Mhm.
they allow me to have a great time. And this is fundamental to the core developer experience, in that there are people working away so hard, innovating and improving the experience for developers every single day. And that's why I'm always advocating for as well. Like if you improve the developer experience and if you improve the accessibility to tech and to building, then who knows what we're going to be able to achieve as a
Mhm.
society if we can lower those barriers and get more and more people involved in tech and building stuff and solving problems for the world, the more you open it up, the more diverse you make the industry, because the more you allow people to get into it and make it easy,
Yeah.
the better things are going to be, right?
Kind of like an antithesis of like, not an antithesis, but like a similar of like, build it and they will come, teach it and they will build, right?
Yes, exactly.
Um,
Allow it, let them do it, empower them,
yes.
set them
Yes.
free, and they will run free.
And to your point, like one of the cool things that I've run into is like you mentioned immutable deploys earlier, right? And I think like one of the cool things about that is that like it allows you to roll back a lot of your mistakes, right? Because I've had a lot of instances where it's like git commit dash m add memory leak on accident, right? Like
Yeah.
and then the next day you're like, maybe I shouldn't have done that. Let's roll back that release and like see what we can do
Jamstack
from
is
there.
safe, it's version controlled in Git usually anyway, but also then you've got you can roll back at the click of a button. So even if you are a little bit unsure about how something is going to work, you could just YOLO deploy it, get it out there. It's fine as long as you don't lose your company lots and lots of money. And then, especially if you're doing a hobby project, it removes that barrier to like, oh, should I release this? Should I not? Get it out there and try it out.
Hmm.
And I'm sorry, I'm just got distracted by this long message.
There
I
you
think that's
go.
my problem. I'd love to learn front end coding, Jamstack stuff, but I'm never sure where to start. Like, how deep should my knowledge and understanding be to have a good baseline to go from? If Jamstack does all these things, should I still learn about the inner workings of it at all? That's a great question.
It's a great question.
It's a great question. So I think, like I was saying before, you don't need to know the inner workings of it, but you already do, mystery husband. Anyway, you know the inner workings of servers, but you don't even need to as a beginner. The main thing you need to learn as a Jamstack developer is how to build an HTML page and how to connect that to a hosting provider. Maybe that's with Git and version control, and it doesn't even need to be. You can actually drag and drop folders of websites to Netlify, for example. And so you only need to learn as much as you need to know for the thing you are building. And
Hmm.
that's what's great as well. So if you don't know how to make API calls to a database and you're not using a database in your Jamstack project, then you don't need to learn it. There are so many things that I still don't know. But one of my other philosophies is build stuff, learn things, and love what you do. And
Yeah.
so I learn things by building stuff. So I think, oh, I want to learn this. I'm not going to go and sit and read loads and loads of docs and look at loads of video tutorials. I'm going to get stuck into the code. I am going to create a static website, and then I'm going to bring in all the tools that I might need as and when I might need them. Stephanie Eccles talks about this a lot as well. We'll get to this later, but one of the women of Jamstack on the womenofjamstack.com site that I made,
Hmm.
she talks about that a lot. You don't need to know everything to get started. You just need to get started. And that's my advice to you, mystery husband. Make an HTML page, hook it
Yeah.
up to Git, hook it up to Netlify, and deploy it and see it live. And then you'll want to do more. You'll want to go from there. You'll feel empowered and inspired to add a little bit more, to add a little bit more. Oh, maybe if I do this, I'll learn how to do this through doing it. And that's the
Right.
key. You can start from literally a HTML boilerplate and then go from there.
Hmm. And the cool part about stuff like Jamstack is like DevOps is its own skill set, right? Like there is a ton to know about architecture and like, we were talking about load balancing, like that is a world on itself, right? And likewise, backend can be its own thing. And you were mentioning earlier on how there's like the additional components to Jamstack, like the I forget which term you use, but like the add-on components to Jamstack that like
Adjacent technologies.
adjacent technologies. Yes, perfect. Of like serverless functions and backend is scaffolding. Backend is its own skill set, right?
Oh,
So being able to
yes.
focus on those core ideas of how do you build a function, how do you interact with that backend function, how do you build the front end, and kind of letting the other stuff dissolve until you need to worry about it or until you want to learn about it is really
Yes.
empowering for newcomers.
Yes. It's like when they say tidy house, tidy mind, right?
Yeah.
If you have a whole room full of absolute trash, you have no idea where to start. So you've
Hmm.
got to compartmentalize that trash into different piles and deal with one pile at a time when you are ready for it. And
Yeah.
that's probably the wrong analogy because
It's
code
a
isn't
great
trash.
analogy.
But you get overwhelmed when you see so much in front of you, and there is so much to learn. Sometimes I'm scrolling through Twitter and something is released here and a new thing is available here and this is available there and oh, try this today. And it's like when I first kind of started being in this tech ecosystem, this echo chamber, I used to bookmark every single tweet. I used to say, right, I've got to learn that. I've got to learn that. I need to look up at that. I need to use that. But you can't do everything. You
Yeah.
can't. And maybe you'll never get to some things. And it's great that they're there for other people. You just got to do you. You've got to just decide which pile of trash to clean up next. And then maybe one day, I mean, I don't think will ever be trash free in that big room. But, it's a forever journey, right?
Right.
We're always going to be learning because there's always new stuff coming out. There's always new problems being solved. There's always new innovation going on. And so you have to separate yourself from how can I learn everything? You can't. You've just got to learn something. Learn one little thing through putting that site live. Learn one other thing through putting that site live. And maybe do some open source contributions. There's a thriving open source community in the tech space. Loads of active projects to get involved in if you want to just dip your toes into some good first issues that are labeled on GitHub, for example. I always say, like, find a community that suits you, that is working on things that you believe in and that you're passionate about. And it's sometimes it's hard to say just do it, right? But you've got to just get over that barrier, and bringing it back, working on the Jamstack in this static first kind of way, it does help you get there faster.
Yeah. Yeah. I love this comment from JVLA. Can I just live in a particular pile of trash as a Cody Trash
Yes.
Panda? Yes.
Yes, you can. That's the thing. You can stay in a comfy pile of trash. And
Yeah.
that's okay. If you're happy in your trash and you know your way around it and you are feeling productive, carry on.
It's like the time where like I leave my watch in this really weird place, like on a desk, but underneath three piles of paper. It's like I know exactly where that watch is at all times.
Exactly. And that it is such a personal thing. There are so many coding wars. This language is better than this language. This framework is better than this framework. And
Oh, yeah.
I don't care about all that stuff. Use the right tool for the job. That brings me back to another blog post I wrote a few weeks ago about when I was talking about my journey, the iterations of my blog. I started with one framework, I went to another framework, and I went to another framework, and all for different reasons. And it's all part of a journey. Just because you write some code for one project in one way doesn't mean it's going to stay like that forever. Things grow, things change, new things come out. You want to try new things. One of the most useful ways, I think, to learn a new technology is to clone another project in a different technology rather than starting from scratch. And so that's valid as well, to rebuild things, and nothing's ever finished.
Yeah, yeah. In fact, I was just taking a look at Solid.js recently. We had a chat with Ryan Carniato not that long ago, and his intro like wowed me. So I had to build something with it, and I just built my traditional to-do app, right? Like the
There you
one that
go.
everyone always builds. It's like it's good enough to evaluate the tool to see how it works. Like there's
Yeah,
something to be said about that familiarity, but exploring something new within that context of that familiarity.
absolutely.
So one of the things that you had mentioned earlier was women of Jamstack. I would love to hear more about that because every time I hear about it, it seems super cool. I caught one of your Twitter spaces actually, and that was a great conversation. So please tell us more about it.
Yes, so as we know, there are a lot of men in the tech space, very vocal, always talking on Twitter, and there's a lot of men in the Jamstack space. And I'm a woman in the Jamstack space, and actually, selfishly, I couldn't really find any women to network with, to speak to, just make friends with. So I launched Women of Jamstack to try and find just more women on the Jamstack to kind of diversify and even out that space. And so far we have, what is it, 29 members
Nice.
on the site, womenofjamstack.com, 29 members so far. And I wanted to get to 50 by the end of April, but that's not happened. But it's growing every now and then. So I'm encouraging people to submit a PR on GitHub if you're working on the front end and any adjacent Jamstack technologies and Jamstack. And I just want to collect a group of people together who are not men because the space is full of lots and lots of men a lot of the time. And, you know, with the conferences that exist as well, I know that a lot of companies who are putting on conferences are really committed to diversifying the speakers and the lineup. And this could be a good resource for companies to use to source people who are not men to speak at their conferences as well. Just, collecting everyone together. I have a similar website called womenwhostream.tech as well, which has the same purpose because as we know, there are mainly men who stream tech on Twitch, and I've got quite a few now on that website, and it's still growing. But it's just a nice way to find people to connect with who need, could benefit from elevating and celebrating in a space that is mainly dominated by men.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. And there's so many like awesome voices in that community as well of women who both stream and are in Jamstack, right?
Exactly.
Earlier in chat, Techy Girl was in here, and she's
Yes,
building a great period tracking application, right? Like
I
there's
love
so
Techie Girl.
yeah, yeah. And there's so many incredible people in that space that it's important to amplify their voices and to have them
Absolutely.
heard. So I think that's an awesome project. And again, the Women of Jamstack website, like it's so aesthetically pleasing. Like I know that's not the main point of it, right? But I just like going back to that earlier point of what I was saying of like all of the websites that I've seen you build are awesome, and this is definitely on that list. So
Thank you. And going back to the YOLO deploy point, actually, Women of Jamstack, I first released Women of Jamstack when it had no CSS. It was just HTML. And it's only one page. And I've got a YouTube video showing the a 7-minute condensed version of a stream in which I released it and YOLO deployed it. And again, I wanted to get something out there. And I wanted to say, look, I'm building this. It doesn't matter if it doesn't look nice right now. Let's just get it out on the Jamstack. It just let me, I didn't have to wait. I just got it out and could start promoting it. And it doesn't matter. You have to remove that level of like perfectionism, remove the anxiety of, oh, what are people going to say? I mean, people do say, why have you built it like that? It looks stupid. There's no CSS, but I don't care. And it's a teaching point for people, right? It's a learning point to say, actually, I don't care. Neither should you. And then,
mhm.
which brings me to the next campaign that I wrote a blog post about and talked about on Twitter. When HTML is all you need to build a website. And then when I tweeted this out and started talking about it, people started being really creative with
Oh,
HTML and just showing me their HTML only websites. They were being so creative. You should look at some of the submissions. I'll get the blog post. I'll put it in the chat. And it was great. And that's the thing, when you actually limit yourself to these kinds of things, just use HTML or just use this or just have a single page. When you have limits, you actually feel like maybe you do a bit more. This is the thing. It's like limiting the trash pile, isn't it? Limit yourself when you first start to just using this, and then actually you can feel very accomplished by
yeah.
building something with constraints. You need constraints with everything, right? Like I was talking to a friend yesterday. They are just embarking upon a new project as a tech lead, and they were asking for my experience when I was a tech lead. And one of the things I did was give people very strict rules around very certain things, such as what days we did planning on and what days we did retros on, and how long a sprint was. And within those constraints, the team could run itself, and there was no anxiety about when things were going to happen and what things needed to happen. And so that's the same thing, like on a team level, an individual level, on a technical level. If you have boundaries and constraints, you can generally achieve a lot more, a lot quicker, I
Yeah,
think.
yeah, totally. And I was actually looking at that thread that you'd posted, like when you'd posted it, and then the follow blog post, and there was some really cool, like there was
Yeah.
animations going on, like someone had like double marquees that were moving things in like really
Yeah.
awesome
And then there was
ways.
somebody who used table attributes to actually fake CSS as well. It was brilliant. But then some people also just submitted plain HTML websites that they used for their portfolio, and they
Yeah.
have done for so long. And there should be nothing to be ashamed of about that, because it's really, really, I mean, I was about to say it's really, really brave, but it kind of is. Because people will criticize that, because we've been so conditioned to like the newest, shiniest, most innovative thing in JavaScript, you know? And so
Hmm.
I'm trying to like reel that in a bit, you know, and talk about you don't need all that shiny nonsense. As we said right at the beginning of the stream, as long as if your content is readable, if it's usable, if it's accessible, then it doesn't matter what it looks like, right? It has to be function over form, everybody.
And it's important to remember that like not all developers are UI developers, and
Exactly.
like backend developers and like native developers, like we need them, and they are just as valuable on a team as a fancy UI or whatnot, right?
Exactly.
So this concept of like, oh, you have to have CSS and it has to be the fancy, it has to have 30 animations, and then
Mm.
my favorite part is how the animations even start impacting accessibility oftentimes, right?
Absolutely.
Like,
So on my stream, every now and then I'll do like a roast my website thing where people will submit their websites, their
mhm.
portfolio websites. Usually they're just starting out and they want some feedback on their website. And most of the time, the biggest thing is, why are you using all these animations?
Yeah.
It's just a blog post. Stop moving things, stop controlling my scroll, stop putting things here over there. You know, it's like cookie pop-ups, isn't it? It's nonsense. You know, but that's the thing. People are taught, or they are in embarking upon a journey where they think they need to do XYZ. They need animations, they need state management, they need databases. You know, you can build a blog site with no database, with none of that, with no JavaScript. You can build a blog site using a tool like 11 for example, which is just basically a build tool rather than a framework.
Mhm.
Keep your data, your blog post as marked down in the repo or JSON, and then push it up to Git, which will run the build process, and then the static files will live on a CDN, right? You don't
Right.
need all of this stuff, but I think because there's so much noise on Twitter and in the tech space about the newest and shiniest things, people get sucked into that because they think this is all I know. And I think when you, especially when you get into tech later, and maybe you haven't done any courses or haven't done any boot camps or anything. See you soon, Jason. Thank you. And perhaps you're kind of you're running before you can walk, right? And so I always people ask me, I want to learn web development. Where do I start? Start at HTML. Deploy an HTML only site, and that is going to stand you in good stead. I saw some people say things like, you don't need to learn HTML, just learn React. And it's like not even understanding that React has to compile to HTML, and you have to understand the HTML that you're delivering to the browser.
Yeah.
And so there's this misunderstanding because of the entry point that some people make. And,
Mhm.
you know, if you go back to the Jamstack, the simplest thing, HTML file, and you can build HTML websites forever and ever and ever. You don't need to move on to anything else.
Right.
And that's the joy. And you can host an HTML website on the Jamstack forever and ever and ever. And you never have to do anything else more complicated if that is not your bag, you know?
Yeah. Ben Myers made a great comment not that long ago. He said, "It's so easy to believe that more is more,"
Yeah.
and it's
True
not.
story.
It's frankly not often.
True story. And that's another lesson that I learned in my blog site, actually, in the refactor that I did from Next.js to 11. I'm not throwing shade on Next.js absolutely at all, because it's a completely valid tool, but it came with so much that I didn't need for my
Mm.
blog site. And so moving it away from the JavaScript framework area more to the Jamstack static first approach kind of building process, I really increased performance and I really decreased the complexity of it. And it's actually a lot more joyful to work on now. And so less is definitely more, always more. And I think maybe we're seeing a bit of a shift because more and more people are talking about this now, but it's kind of a shift in one area, but also a huge complexity drive in another area. But what I always say to people is it's great that all this technology exists and the options are there if you need them. But most of the time, you're actually not going to need them. You
Yeah.
might need like one feature of a framework or one thing here or one thing there. And that's what's good about the Jamstack as well, right? It's because what I like about the Jamstack is that, like I said right at the beginning, it's not about what tool you use. So Jamstack is not really about JavaScript frameworks. JavaScript frameworks can be tools that you can use to build websites that are built into static assets, but they're not necessary. And actually, a lot of the JavaScript frameworks do come with a lot of extra complexity and overheads that will overwhelm you and put you off if you're starting out. And that's why, back to basics, I'll say again, just start with an HTML site, maybe then add some CSS, add some client-side JavaScript if you need, and then move on from there. Maybe in a next project, a JavaScript framework or similar might be appropriate. But it always depends. And people ask me all the time, what framework should I learn when I'm starting out? Don't learn a framework until you need to, because they are there. And the frameworks can also be very opinionated because they are built by people who needed that functionality when they were building something, and not everyone needs that. And with this extra Jamstack adjacent tooling, like serverless functions and edge functions, you actually can harness the power of your CDNs like Netlify for that functionality rather than that functionality that comes inbuilt with frameworks. To take a very pertinent example, Next.js has serverless functions inbuilt to the framework. So where you run Next.js, you don't need to run serverless functions proprietary to your cloud hosting provider. You run kind of serverless functions that are in the Next.js way inside the framework. But if you but you can also use serverless functions like the Netlify serverless functions in Next.js as well if you needed. But the thing is, you might start a Next.js project and never ever need serverless functions, but you've got all that overhead inside of your compiled site that gives you that functionality that you could remove and it wouldn't make any difference. And so that's what I was going back to before, like what Stephanie was saying, the Jamstack, you can start small and then add stuff as you need. So you can start a plain HTML site and then add serverless functions and add server-side rendering and add edge functions when you need it, rather than getting everything at once and lying in that pile of trash that you might not need.
Right, right. So you had mentioned just now edge functions and serverless functions and CDNs, right? Can we touch on like what is a CDN and like kind of like what is this concept of the edge?
So when I first heard this, I was like, what? I know about the network edge in terms of a CDN, and I know, but what are edge functions? And it took me a little while to get my head around it, right? So serverless functions have been around for a little while, from places like Vercel and Netlify and AWS. And contrary to what the term suggests, serverless does not actually mean the absence of a server. Serverless in this context is like a model that removes the limitations and the constraints from the traditional physical or virtual servers that I was talking about before, like back in the day where you would host your traditional monolithic applications on a physical server, or if you were running a small project, it would be like a server in your bedroom kind of thing. And what serverless does, it allows developers to build stuff and scale stuff by only considering the functions that need to be run for particular uses, rather than needing to manage the overheads of a persistently running application. So normally when you have a backend, you need a server with code on that is persistently running all the time.
Hmm.
to manage state and I mean, you can't manage state on serverless functions, but you need something that is running all the time to contact, to read from the database and write to the database and do this and authenticate this and all that stuff. So serverless functions is basically like back-end code as a service on demand, right?
Hmm.
And it's like you have to, when you're hosting a physical and virtual server as well, and you have to pay for that constantly running resource. But with serverless functions, you only pay for the resource you use. So for example, if I make a call to a serverless function on Netlify that I've written, in the background, the server spins up, it executes my code, and then it spins down. So it's kind of like better for the environment to use serverless because the I could run a server that is running for days and days and days and no one actually contacts it to do anything. Do you know what I mean? Like my website could get no traffic, but I'm paying for all that uptime and the carbon from the running server is going into the atmosphere when no one's even using it, right? With serverless functions, it spins up, it spins down, it's on demand, it's pretty good, right?
Hmm.
It's and also serverless functions and servers in the cloud and stuff, they scale automatically, don't they? The CDN takes care of that. If I get a million requests to my serverless function, the CDN is going to take care of it. I'm going to pay more for it, but it's going to take care of it. But if the next day I get 2 requests to my serverless function, I don't need to worry about the differences between day 1 and day 2. Like that's still going to work.
At
Okay.
least, at least from a technical perspective, you
Yeah,
may worry
exactly.
about it from
Right.
a business perspective.
Yeah. So I've mentioned CDN, Content Delivery Network, a lot. So serverless is adjacent to the Jamstack, and together they work pretty similar in terms of how they are executed. So, well, the edge functions do. So a CDN has nodes all around the world. It's a global network working together to serve cached content, the cached static assets, to users from the closest server location possible. So when you are contacting a CDN on a static site, you are getting those static assets. They're really quick because they are served close to you. So a CDN is also known as an edge network, right? Which is what I knew the edge as before this whole edge computing thing came about. So the edge refers to the servers that sit on the edge of multiple networks. So you have like network A over here and network B over here, and in the middle you have like this server bridge, which is like the edge because it's at the edge of network A and network B, and it routes traffic between it, and that's how stuff goes quite fast around the world, right? So something might travel from network A to network B to get over there and blah 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 through these edges, right? Now, traditionally, serverless functions, and still now, historically, serverless functions, they've been restricted to running on servers in specific locations. I always use this example. AWS has specific regions, and when you are running a server or Lambda servers on AWS, you choose the region you want to run it in. And US West is the furthest AWS location away from me. And it takes quite a long time to contact US West from the UK. And I always use this anecdote where I was working on a battle snake last year. And I was trying to develop my local battle snake against their development servers in US West. But the latency was too high for me to actually send and receive messages. And they always timed out. And I couldn't do it because US West was too far away.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you're using serverless functions for server-side rendering to enrich your Jamstack site or to make any client-side requests, you need high availability on those global servers in order to make your website fast for everyone. So, for example, when I make a request to a static asset in the UK, I get it from the static CDN cached node closest to me. But currently, when I use a serverless function, I am restricted to the region that server is running the code on, which might be US West, right?
Mm-hmm.
However, with edge functions now, you can do that computation. You can run those serverless functions on the edge network. So now we have the static assets served from the edge network. And now we also have serverless functions, excuse me, run on the edge network. And this is what's the most exciting thing, right? So this really, really speeds up the server-side rendering on the web adjacent to the whole Jamstack static philosophy. You can execute those serverless functions at the closest location to a request. And I think this is a core innovation of the web that means actually, as a collective, developers can make the web faster and more accessible, and furthermore, begin to see a reduction in carbon emissions as the result of that data being served quicker over a shorter distance. So we're removing the reliance on persistently running servers, which could be worse for the environment than running serverless functions. And furthermore, we're enhancing it by now moving those serverless functions closer to the request, which means that it's got to travel even less distance.
Right.
And quick plug here, what is great is that you've got, with Netlify, for example, like 125,000 serverless function invocations per month on the starter plan in Netlify. You can actually execute 3 million edge functions per month on the starter plan on that account on Netlify as well. So because maybe the overheads are even less, because the edge functions have a shorter execution time as well than the serverless functions. It's just like opening up development for developers to be able to run more edge functions, maybe when you're prototyping projects, for example, before you are earning money from the site, before you want to pay for your hosting. And it just could be really, really exciting. One of the core details, the differences between serverless functions on Netlify and edge functions on Netlify is that serverless functions run on Node, but edge functions actually run on Deno, which is an open source runtime built entirely on like open web standards. So an HTTP response and an HTTP request in Netlify edge functions is just the standard web request and response. There's no like extra proprietary stuff you need to learn. So again, the developers at Netlify are innovating in trying to get people into this edge function ecosystem quicker. So you don't have to learn, you don't really have to learn how to write edge functions if you already know how to write standard web API stuff, right?
Right.
And so with Netlify edge functions, you can transform those HTTP requests and responses and stream server rendered content. So do server side rendering at the edge to make server side rendering even faster. And you can even run full server side rendered applications at the edge as well. So again, it's not really Jamstack. It's not really like the core philosophy of Jamstack to run full server-side applications at the edge, but it's an adjacent technology to enhance the Jamstack experience, to potentially enhance your static sites, and to be able to make your sites more personalized, because you can use like geolocation data to serve different country content, potentially different language content, and do all sorts of fun stuff like that. I'm going to put the blog post in the chat that I'm kind of referring to as I'm talking, which basically talks about everything I just talked about, and gives you an example of what you can do with edge functions as well. And it's just writing JavaScript or TypeScript, understanding an HTTP response and a request. And then what else comes with Netlify edge functions is the Netlify context object, which allows you basically to do all this really cool stuff without having to do extra stuff. So for example, if you want to return data as JSON from the edge function, there's a really handy utility method to do that, a convenience method. And if you want to log some stuff to the edge function logs, there's another convenience method that works really nicely to give you extra information. And you can do all the standard web stuff with these edge functions, like proxying a request to another API as well. So often as developers, in our serverless functions, we might want to call out to a database or get some data from here or get some data from there. You can do all that in edge functions as well. And I've actually got an example site that me and Phil Hawksworth set up to show people all of what's possible with edge functions currently, and new functionality has been added all the time. And so you can read the docs. You can deploy that whole site to Netlify if you want as well, which is actually rendered all at the edge. So the website that I'm showing you here, the example site, it's not a Jamstack site because it's a completely server-side rendered application all at the edge, but it shows you what's possible with it. We are streaming and rendering a whole website server-side at the edge, but it's almost as fast as serving static assets from that edge network as well.
That's so cool. This edge functions seem like an absolute game changer.
I think they will be. And I think that they're only really starting to come into the ecosystem. Vercel released them last year, re-released them now, and Cloudflare have had them for a little while. But I really think that it's going to change accessibility to places in the world that probably had a really bad time with loading websites that were server-side rendered using serverless functions, right, on the Jamstack.
One of the things that I tried my best to do when we migrated from Gatsby to Next.js for one of my blog sites is we have a lot of readers in India. And I remember when we set up the initial version with our deploy that was just on a server here on the West Coast, it was the exact same story that you were talking about, where it was like, hey, these images like aren't even loading like at all, right? And geography is absolutely part of the inclusivity and accessibility of
Absolutely.
a project, right? So yeah, definitely very cool to see these edge functions come into play. Can't wait to utilize them more.
Yeah, imagine the experience that people are going to get in India now on that site. If you can use edge functions in Next.js, by the way, already if it's on Netlify. So one of the great things that the team at Netlify have been doing as well is making sure that you can use edge functions on Netlify with the existing frameworks that you're using as well. And so because of this, I think that the ecosystem is getting much richer. Everything is being innovated and everything is being integrated. And again, that's the accessibility and inclusivity thing on a different level. Let's not lock this technology down to a specific framework or a specific technology. Let's open it up to everyone to see what they can build, and let's make the web better to give people a better life in the end, with more access to content, more access to opportunities. Like, I think the internet is life-changing for people, right? And for society, if we can just use it for good, right? And I think this is, as this evolves and as this becomes more a part of the ecosystem, I think things could change for the better.
Oh yeah. And I think that's like, what a wonderful place, because I know that we're coming up on time. What a wonderful place to close that off, right?
Yeah.
The idea of like, we're gonna make things better, things are gonna be awesome, and we're gonna use tech to do it, darn it.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's go.
Yeah. Deploy it.
Ship it, YOLO. Go.
Yes. Awesome. Well, Salma, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having
Chad,
me.
thank you so much for being here. And yeah. All right, gang. Well, I will catch y'all later. And until next time, see ya.
Bye.